A schedule, that's a good thing, man. Your brain will thank you for it. It will stabilize your nervous system. With a bit of a plan, that's a good thing. You need a career, you need something productive to do with your time. You need to regulate your use of drugs and alcohol, most particularly alcohol, because that does in a lot of people. You need a family, like the family you have, your parents and all that. It'd be nice if you all got along, you could work on that, that's a good thing to work on. And then, you know, you probably need children at some point, and that's life. That's what life is. And if you're missing, you know, you may have a good reason to not be operating on one of those dimensions. It's not mandatory, but I can tell you that if you're not operating reasonably well on 4, I think I mentioned 6, if you're not operating reasonably well on at least 3 of them, there's no way you're going to be psychologically thriving. And that's more pragmatic in some sense than psychological, right? Human beings have a nature, there's things we need. And if we have them, well, that's good. And if we don't have them, well, then we feel the lack. And so behaviorists, behavioral psychologists concentrate a lot more on that sort of thing. You know, it's practical. It's like strategizing. Make a career plan. Figure out how to negotiate, because that's bloody important. Figure out how to say what you need. Figure out how to tell the truth to people. Figure out how to listen to your partner in particular, because if you listen to them, they will actually tell you what they want, and sometimes you can give it to them and maybe they'll return the favor. And if you practice that for like 15 years, well, then maybe you're constantly giving each other what you want. Well, hooray, that would be good. And then there's 2 of you under most circumstances, and it's better to have 2 brains than 1, because people think differently because of their temperament mostly. And so the negotiation is where the wisdom arises, and it's part of the transformation, the psychological transformation that's attendant on an intimate relationship, and one of the fundamental purposes of a long-term intimate relationship. Anyways, when that falls apart, chaos ensues, and that's why chaos is represented so continually in myths and stories. And I'm going to walk you through a bit of that more today. I talked about the story of Jonah. Now, here's something to think about. The internal representations of language meaning evolved partly from our pre-linguistic ancestors' knowledge of social relations. Like modern monkeys and apes, our ancestors lived in groups with intricate networks of relationships that were simultaneously competitive and cooperative. The demands of social life created selective pressures for just the kind of complex, abstract, conceptual, and computational abilities that are likely to have preceded the earliest forms of linguistic communication. Although baboons have concepts and acquire propositional information from other animals' vocalizations, they cannot articulate this information. They understand dominance relationships and matrilineal kinship, but they have no words for them. This suggests that the internal representation of many concept relations and action sequences does not require language, and that language did not evolve because it was uniquely suited to representing thought. Well, you know, you can think without language. Well, take the case of someone who's deaf and mute. They have no language. Well, they can operate in society. They learn how to represent other people, and they do that with image. Now, the postmodernists, who I despise, would be a reasonable way of putting it, have this proposition that there's no meaning outside language. And it's a powerful argument, by the way, but it's seriously wrong. There is a meaning network outside of language, and it's what language is grounded in, and that's this pre-verbal comprehension of the world. It's an embodied comprehension of the world. Animals have it. Lobsters have it. You know, this particular scientist, Seyfarth, talks about our shared history with, you know, higher primates. That probably goes back 20 million years, something like that. We split from the common ancestor with chimps about 7 million years ago. But, you know, lobsters have dominance hierarchies. They hardly have a nervous system at all, which is partly why they're studied quite extensively. And so they have a social structure and they understand it. Like if one lobster, if you're a lobster, which would be quite a shock to you if it happened, and you were fighting with another lobster and you lost, you would remember that, and the next time you saw that lobster you'd scuttle off somewhere else, and you'd know that, and all the lobsters in an area know who's top lobster and who isn't, and top lobster gets the best bloody place to be and the best food. So this dominance issue, this cultural issue, you know, the fact that we live in a social environment is far deeper than people usually consider, and it's also worth considering, and this is what you might think of from an evolutionary perspective. You know, you think of natural selection as producing evolution, right? Well, random mutation with natural selection. But here's something to think about, and Darwin knew this, but Darwin was really smart, and the biologists who followed in his footsteps, even up to now, have only expanded out a fraction of what he had to say. You know, he was very interested in sexual selection. Now, one of the things about human beings that's unique is that human females are picky maters. They're choosy. They're also sneaky because you can't tell when they're ovulating, and with many other female animals you know. So they have hidden ovulation and they're choosy, and they tend to choose men who are more successful in the dominance hierarchy. Well, there's a shock. I mean, if you have a choice, why not, if you pick someone who's at the bottom of the competence hierarchy, well, that's probably not going to work out very well for you. And since women bear the burden of reproduction, it's perfectly reasonable for them to search out someone who's going to be helpful. So productive, fair, generous. And you know, when you think of a dominance hierarchy, you might think, well, it's the powerful guy, the aggressive guy, say, that rises to the top of the dominance hierarchy, and that's not true. It's not even true among chimps. Like, you can get a chimp tyrant, but then what happens is other chimps gang up on him and tear him to pieces, and they don't do it nicely. They don't do it nicely. And the chimps that tend to maintain their dominance for long periods of time have a pretty wide network of friends, roughly speaking, with whom they engage in reciprocal interactions like grooming, and they actually pay a lot of positive attention to the female chimps, who have their own hierarchy, by the way, and to their offspring. So they're like baby kissing politicians. And so the idea that it's raw power that produces dominance is it's just wrong. It's wrong now, you know, tyrants, you know, it's pretty damn unstable business being a tyrant. There's lots of people who want to kill you, plus, you know, you tend to rule over something approximating hell. So maybe that's better than being a subject in hell, but it's not much better.